Hey, family, it's your sister here, Jocelyn, and I want to welcome you to our season finale of a 2020 broadcast series. And we've had a powerful 3 months. Over the last several weeks, we've touched on grief and loss and how to navigate that painful experience. And we talked about shame and how to free ourselves from the burdens that we might have been carrying for years, from addiction and abuse and things that we might have hidden in the closet from our past. And we've also this month have been exploring the topic of forgiveness and not only how to forgive others, but how to experience and receive the forgiveness that God so freely offers us. And so, if this is your first time tuning in, I strongly encourage you to go back and listen to our previous episodes on our podcast station, or also check it out on our YouTube channel and subscribe. You will be blessed by it, just like you're going to be blessed by today's episode. But before we get into the teaching for today, before we get into the interview today, I actually want to do a little bit of teaching from my book. I want to finish up the teaching on the SERVES model. And I'll recap on what we discussed the last few weeks. SERVES is actually a framework on how we can begin to heal from painful experiences in our past. And it's an acronym. So the S stands for spirituality and how our faith plays an important role in our healing process. And then we have E, which talks about expressing ourselves and expressing the pain that we might have experienced from years ago or even today, the pain that we're experiencing. The R stands for renewing the mind and how we need God to help us to transform our mind and being able to release those negative thoughts. And so the V stands for vision for the future. And for many of us, we might have had some very painful experience in our past that makes it very difficult for us to have a vision for the future. We might not think that good things are in the cards for us because we've just had so much bad things happen to us. And so we might be actually afraid to believe God for more. We might limit what God can do because we don't want to be disappointed again if God lets us down and we don't get what we're believing for. But here's the thing about God. God doesn't have limits. God is not limited by our current circumstances, and he's definitely not limited by our past. See, people, they'll limit us by what has happened in our past. Try walking into a bank with a bad credit score asking for a $100,000 loan. They will look at you like you crazy. So we know people judge us by our past, but that's not how God works. He's not looking at your spiritual credit score like denied. That's not what God does. God is in the restoration business. One of my favorite shows back in the day I used to always watch was Fixer Upper with Chip and Joanna Gaines. And I love how they will walk into this home and sometimes they'll take a client in there and you see the client's face and they look at this like, this is a dump. Why they bring me here? So because they see how the place looks in its current condition. But Chip and Joanna, no, they are able to see things through a different lens. They're able to see a place in all of its mess and see what its potential is and have a vision for the future for that place. And I feel like that's the same thing when it comes to God. When he comes in our situation, our place might be a mess. We might be like, my life is just all over the place. But God's not intimidated by that because he can walk into our mess and have a vision for our future and say, I want to do more for you. But we have to embrace that vision. We have to be able to see past our current situation. And so I encourage you to take the limits off God and start dreaming again. My pastor, Father Flager, will always say, let's brush the dust off our dreams and believe again, right? And so that's what I'm encouraging you to do today is not limit what God can do. So that's V for vision. Then we have E, which stands for embrace life. And we can start embracing life by having a spirit of gratitude, which is very difficult when we had painful experiences. And I get that. And I don't want to diminish what you might have gone through. But also, I want to offer you this. If you've gone through abuse, if you've gone through a painful divorce, if you've gone through something that was extremely traumatic, some people, if they've gone through that same experience as you, they didn't make it. They might have either been taken out of here. They might have taken their own life. They might be crazy in a mental hospital, but you're still here. God kept you. And that's a reason to be grateful. That's a reason to thank God. And so in that, we can find a reason to give God praise. And then we can also just say, okay, I'm still here. That means I have a purpose. And that also means this is a gift where I can still experience those beautiful things that God has for us. And God wants us to enjoy this life. And maybe we need to rediscover what we used to do for fun. Maybe you used to like to dance. Maybe you can sing. Maybe you can write. Maybe there's just certain things that you used to do that you just put off because you lost yourself in a bad marriage. You lost yourself after that painful experience. But I'm telling you that God wants you to live and enjoy your time here. So we need to learn to embrace life. And lastly, the S stands for support system. We were never meant to do life alone, y'all. I'm telling you, we need community. And I know when you've dealt with painful experiences, one of the things that we like to do is isolate. And granted, it's nothing wrong with being by yourself and spending time with God. That time is important. But we're not meant to carry our burdens alone. And so tapping into communities, whether it's through your church, whether it's through a support group, whether it's with trusted friends, your pastor, a counselor, that is important. So make sure that you have a support system to help you to move forward on your healing journey. So that's it. And if you are interested in learning more about the SIRS model, I've been putting on the screen where you can get a free copy of chapter 8 from my book that talks about the SIRS model. And so just go to faithonthejourney.com and you can go under free resources and download the SIRS model. You'll get a worksheet and more information on it to help you to experience healing in your life. But that's it for now. With that, I am excited to move into the interview portion of today and bring on our very special guest, Dr. Sharon Ellis Davis. And I tell you, this is a powerful woman of God. I actually had the opportunity to study under her. And you know, when you say doctor, that means this woman is educated, okay? Gone to school, got her doctorate from McCormick Theological Seminary. And I am an alum of McCormick. So shout out there, very excited. But Dr. Davis is a pastor at United Church of Christ and an affiliate professor at McCormick Theological Seminary. She's a trainer at Faith Trust Institute on healthy boundaries and domestic violence. And she served for over 31 years as a Chicago police officer. She, again, has her master's in divinity from Chicago Theological Seminary, doctorate in divinity from McCormick, and she has her PhD from Chicago Theological Seminary. And Dr. Davis is a survivor of sexual and interpersonal violence. And so she's going to talk about her story. And she's also has a book coming out as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But Dr. Davis, so excited to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
Yes. So why don't we start off by just learning a little bit more about your story?
Certainly, Minister Jocelyn Jones, thank you so much for having me here at the finale. And it's exciting to me to be here to share with you and the audience. And I thank those who have joined us for coming to listen to what we have to say. And hopefully they will hear and you will hear a word from God within the midst of that. I am Sharon Ellis Davis, and I am a survivor of sexual and domestic violence. And it's been a journey because one of the things about sexual and domestic violence is that depending on the severity of what happened or the way in which people are able to cope or not able to cope, it can generate so much trauma and cause so much acting out and so much negative behavior and so much anger and so much need for revenge and need for people to hear the story, to believe. It's just so many things that comes out of being a survivor of sexual and domestic violence and either one of them. And so I'm honored to talk about that and share some of my story and talk about issues of forgiveness and all that that's about. But I'm also more than honored to talk about it on the eve of the beginning of Domestic Violence Month, as we want people to be aware of so many facets of domestic violence. We know about the Cancer Awareness Month, but sometimes we forget that also involved in that is Domestic Violence Awareness Month also. And so I won't make this a long, drawn out story. I'm a survivor. I think that's what I really want you to know. I'm here, and I'm halfway sane and not as crazy as I could be, but crazier probably than I would like to be. But certainly love who I am and who God has molded me into in the midst of surviving. I was married to a police officer on the domestic violence side, which is where I'm staying today, and that person was a Jekyll, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and certainly severely narcissistic, like people we may know today, and a sociopath, like people that we know today, and someone who could make you believe that everything he's doing is right and everything that the victim is doing is wrong, like someone we know today. And so those kinds of people exist in the world, and I can recognize them right away. And the struggle in that, not, yes, the physical violence was there and the emotional violence was there, but the struggle is in getting people to believe you, and trying to find out what to do with all of this anger from, number one, the violence itself, number two, not being able to be believed, and also having experienced the church is not really um, prepared to really navigate victims and survivors of domestic violence in healthy ways. And then coupled with that, a police department that was still the good old boys network. And so there were so many things happening all at the same time, including me being accused of crimes. Does that sound familiar? Including me going to court while the survivor is still mulling around. I used to tell people, this man is going to kill me, and then he's going to run around with you trying to help find my killer, and you would believe him. And that's the sad part. And so it was a journey, Minister Jocelyn, and it left a lot of baggage. Baggage that even in my age I'm still navigating. And healing is different. All of that looks different, when you dealt with trauma, and it's an everyday journey. But it's a place you land into that you learn to find peace with yourself. I don't cry anymore when I tell the story. I'm not angry anymore when I tell the story, and I don't hurt anymore when I tell the story. And so that's a major accomplishment. And I can actually talk with men about domestic violence, which I couldn't before. And so life changes and things happen. If there's any details you want to know about it, but that's the details. I was married to a psycho, a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that I never saw coming. But my senile aunt, Jocelyn, saw it coming when she met him. My late aunt, my mother's sister, my mother's auntie, and she said, something's wrong with that boy. But I was on a mission. And so I've learned to own up to my mission and my choices and hold my own self accountable, even in the midst of understanding why it all happened. So that's basically the story, and I'm willing to share more
Wow.
if you need me to.
No, I appreciate that, and I thank you for kind of sharing some of those details. I know it was so much more involved in that, but when you said that people didn't believe you, and that I know that was difficult because then that made you feel like you were all alone, and there was, I'm assuming, no way out. Like, so, tell us about that struggle and how you were able to navigate pushing through and making the decision to leave.
Oh, that was a difficult decision to leave. Number one, anybody that has studied or been through domestic violence, it's understandable that you don't want to leave because you're scared to leave. There are many reasons people leave. They love that person. They want the family to be together. But I stayed there because I was afraid to leave. I was a police officer. He was a police officer. I had a gun. He had a gun. He would use it. And he attempted to use it one time. And I ran out of the house and left my children. I was so afraid, which were not his children, and went to get the police officer, called the police officer, and I went back to the house with the police officer. I ran to some bar. I didn't even know that bar was. I just happened to appear and I went in it. And they took me back to my house, and my husband opened the door of the house and he says, "Come on in, officers. I'm glad you're here. My wife just pulled a gun on me." And from that point on, so many things happened. The police gave us horrible advice. We both ended up saying it didn't happen under the advice of the police department. And we both were suspended for filing false reports. We both were naive in the advice. And it was just one thing after another. But that's what spurred me. That's really the incident that got me to seriously thinking about leaving. But what really got me to leaving is the way I realized he had isolated my children from me. I thought he was keeping them, so that I can rest when I would come home. But he was really isolating my children. Let's know my friends. Let's know my parents. Let's know threatening them if they would even come around. I did with all of that. But the night his police officer partner picked him up for work, and I was sitting on the couch, and it had gotten to a point where he didn't need a stimuli. We didn't have to argue, which I really didn't because I was afraid of him. But I would talk back. I wasn't afraid not to say what was on my mind. But I was just sitting there reading the book, and it had gotten to the point in our relationships where he didn't have to have any stimuli, this "what did you do" kind of thing. He didn't have to have any stimuli to be abusive. He just would. And so his partner had picked him up that night to work midnights. And as he was leaving out the door, I was sitting on the couch by the door reading, sort of. I was looking at a book, pretending to read to avoid him. And my children were upstairs in the attic. And he literally just grabbed me off the couch while his partner was sitting outside waiting for me. I was in my pajamas, and grabbed me and drug me out of the house, drug me on the porch, while his police officer partner sat there and watched him and never got out the car to help. And all that he said to him was, "Come on, man." And he got in the car and left me out there. And so that was the night that I truly decided that I was going to go. I had paced his bed when he was asleep with my gun, thinking about killing him. But I was so afraid that he would wake up. Because I can be a drama queen, so I know how to play hysterical if I need to. And so my plan was to shoot him and then act as if it was a domestic violence in action, because I could see only one thing stopping this abuse, is that he was dead. It's the only thing I can see doing it. And I walked around the bed several times and I didn't do it. Number one, I had wonderful friends who would talk me down and had talked me down before of even thinking about doing anything crazy. But at the same time, I was afraid he would wake up. He would wake up before I shot him, because I felt like he knew my thoughts anyway. And then he would wake up and then he would recognize that I'm doing this, or I would shoot him and he wouldn't die. As I didn't die in some of the dreams I had that when I'd been shot. And then I would be the one that would end up dead. And so I never did that. But this made me go. And so I made plans to go, and contacted the people that I needed to contact, and found out where I was going to stay. And as soon as he left for work one night, they all showed up. One police officer, one police detention aide, or whatever his position was at that time. My manic depressed sister, who was in a manic state, and a couple of more people, and they moved me in the truck. My sister was very happy during that time, and I was so afraid he was just going to show back up at home, but I managed to.
But you got on out of there. You got out.
And that was again. My kids had them stuff packing upstairs. They were very young, and they knew, and they packed their little stuff, and we just all got the hell up out of there.
You had to go. That's good. And I, thank God you did when you did.
Amen.
And
yes.
I wonder, sometimes when people they might find themselves in a domestic violence situation or in a personal violence situation, and they want to leave, but they're afraid, obviously. And there's so many factors in place that must be considered, right? In terms of having a safety plan and being very strategic. It's not so easy just to leave, right? But I also understand that there might be pressure that they are receiving from individuals to stay, which brings me to my next question in terms of advice that someone might receive, whether it's from an individual in the church or it might be due to their upbringing around you need to forgive and you need to stay because this is marriage and marriage is forever. And so you just need to stay in it. And so what's your thoughts about individuals who say, hey, you just need to forgive and, and to stick it out? What's your thoughts in relation to that advice?
That kind of advice can get you killed. That's what I want to say to people. And that's what I want to say to the community. That's what I want to say to the church. That's what I want to say to friends. When you tell someone to get out, you have to understand everything that they would have to do to get out, and their safety may be at stake. And when a religious person says that, so a person of faith or a person of faith that you have a long-term relationship with, and they say things like that, it gets to making you feel guilty for staying. Women have gone to shelters, and because of the word forgiveness, they have, and then with the badgering and the sorrowfulness of their mates, I'm gonna use him and her, both men and women suffer domestic violence, but I'm using it because mine was a him, and so I'm going to use that, and I'm a she, and so it'll just be easier for me to navigate it in that way. And so to be able to they will convince you, they will bring you flowers. There used to be something called the honeymoon state. That's not used anymore when we talk about domestic violence, because even the honeymoon state is violence. And so they will do all that they can. They'll join the church. They'll get saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost, speaking in tongues as the Lord gave utterance. One Lord, one faith, and one baptism. They'll go to church more than you'll go to church. And then some pastor will see that happening, and they would say, oh, you need to go back with him. You need to forgive them. Look what he's done. He's bringing you all these flowers. And that kind of advice, Jocelyn, can get you killed. And I think that's the main thing. There's other things I could say about this whole issue of forgiveness, and maybe we'll get into some of it. But we have to be careful with how we tell people. Number one, it's not your job to tell people what to do. It's not your place to tell people about forgiveness. People forgive at the level they're able to forgive, and that they're willing to forgive, and that they're ready to forgive. And the three things that come before forgiveness is safety. Safety. You have to heal. There are a lot of things that has to go on before you can even begin to talk to me about forgiveness, because all you're doing when you do that with me is that you're making me worse. You're making my fear worse. You're making my guilt worse. You're making me feel like Jesus is just going to send me to hell without passing go, without collecting $200. You make me feel as if I don't have sense enough to forgive, when I know that's in the Word of God, and that Jesus talks about it. It's interpreted wrongly talking about it, and all of those things are happening all at the same time. And it just may be enough to pressure someone to leave a relationship. And leaving is the most dangerous time in the world for a person to leave. People say, why don't she leave? We should celebrate the fact that they were able to leave, because statistics have it that you go back 7 times before you actually ever leave, for sure. And for certain. And so, I had a friend of mine in the police department who was killed, her and her children, when she left. And so it's horrible. And we cannot afford to do that with people, telling them what to do or what they need to do.
Right. I think you're right on point. And I just want to kind of frame and summarize everything you're saying, because what it sounds like you're saying is when someone makes a decision that they want to leave, it is dangerous. It's not just saying, oh, I'm going to go. Like, their life can be at risk. If the, abuser finds out, they can come after them. So if you right now are listening to this and you have a friend who's in a domestic violence relationship or a loved one, we have to be careful to pressure them to leave, because it's just not that simple, right? There needs to be a safety plan in place. And, we want to trust that the person who's in the situation understands their situation better than you do, right? So that's point number one. I think I'm drawing from what you said. And point number two is, if the church is constantly saying you need to forgive to stay in this relationship, and or not just the church, but people around are saying like telling you what you need to do, it is not helping the situation, because there's steps before they can even think about forgiveness, which I really want to expound upon, which is the process. Forgiveness, even if you're not in a domestic violence relationship, even if it was something else that took place that was extremely painful in your life, I think people just automatically think that forgiveness is supposed to be like, oh, snap my fingers, I forgive, it's done. Oh, and la la la, gumdrops and roses, when really it's a process. So let's talk about the process of forgiveness first, and what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not necessarily.
Mhm. So I think I want to start with, because it's such a controversy talking about this particular subject, and not to bring up painful memories, but with the shooting in South Carolina at Emmanuel Church, people begin to say to talk about the ones that were survivors of that, saying immediately that I forgive them. And so that became such a controversy. Like, how can she forgive them now, and how can he say they forgive him, and what makes them do that, and why would they do that when this person did that to them? And so I just want to say, based on that, because I'm not going to give you an answer to that, but what I am going to say is there are multiple ways that people work out forgiveness in their lives. And perhaps that was something that they needed to do. Perhaps it was the wrong time to do it, but nobody can answer that question really. We can take it and we can break it down, and we can use it to talk about the issue of forgiveness. And so when I'm thinking about forgiveness, I'm always thinking about it from what I've been told. We have something that we call embedded theology and or received theology. And so I grew up understanding that immediacy really was the way to forgive, because God said it. God said, forgive 70 times 70. I think that was Jesus, in the Bible talking during that time. And the prayer says, Our Father, which art in heaven, forgive us, their debts. And then I think it's in Luke, maybe Matthew also, that says, turn the other cheek. Whatever we're supposed to theologically understand that means. And so there are so many ways in which we in the church have talked about forgiveness. And I think the one thing that I really want to impress is that it doesn't have to be the first thing you do. It does not have to be the first thing you do, especially as survivors of trauma, survivors of sexual and domestic violence. It does not have to be. But I can share you my experience of the forgiveness process and where I particularly landed on that. Um, and my abuser wasn't the only person that I was trying to forgive at that time, but I'm still going to use that as a starting point to collectively talk about all those other places. First, there was a place that I needed to go in my head for healing space, for therapeutic space, for reflection space. And in that time, I had to really work out, why did I make such crazy choices? Why did I feel like I had to get married to someone? Why did I feel like at an early age? Why did I feel like I needed to marry a police officer that was, identified by my half senile aunt as crazy, and that something was wrong? What was going on inside of me? And I had to do that through counseling. I had to do that through my friendships that I had to talk about. I had to do that with a therapist, down the road, to really get to understand me and begin to accept that I was in some places, called trauma, from past trauma, this trauma, re-traumatization in the church, from a lot of different spaces where I was not really able to make sense of that. And I had to learn to accept that in me. I had to learn to ask for forgiveness in those places where I thought I needed to be forgave. And in those places where I didn't think that I needed to be forgiven, I did not accept that as something to forgive, but something to accept that this was part of the condition in which I had, that made me make a lot of choices in my particular life. And so getting through that, I think I got through that reasonably so, in the late 80s or maybe early 90s. I had made some sense out of that. And I had forgiven myself. I had done the therapy, and I really did have forgiveness in my heart. I had forgiveness in my heart. And so in the midst of that, I had let it go. And I just want to say what letting it go for me. For me, letting it go meant I didn't wish any more harm on him. I didn't need for the police department to find the truth out and the whole world to know that I was innocent in all of this. I've done my share wrong. I know what wrong feels like and looks like, but I was totally, totally innocent in this whole process, of which they kept saying there's good on both sides, and in a different language than that. But I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything, and having to always say that because they wanted to put it into a you all kind of situation. And so I had gotten past all of that and I had let it go. And for me, that became what God required of me, where forgiveness is even related. I have let it, I didn't want any harm. I didn't want revenge. I was peaceful with myself. Whatever his life brought him in the future was his life bringing it in the future. Whatever his needs are for forgiveness, he can work that out for himself. But I didn't believe I had no obligation to say, I forgive him. I believed that God was satisfied with where I was. Now, what I did have in that moment was a heart for forgiveness. I really did begin to understand his cycleness. I did begin to understand some of his issues around his parents, and we all have these kind of brokenness. I understood that, and although I did not take him off the hook for that, I began to understand it. And many people don't understand the difference between understanding what someone did and still holding them accountable. They think that both means the same thing, but I did understand it. And I wanted to offer him forgiveness, but he hadn't asked me. And I firmly believe that asking for forgiveness for me, not for anybody else, but asking for forgiveness for me is the only way I can forgive him. But I had let it go. Years later, he had been suspended for a few things and came back to work. And I worked in the academy as a police chaplain at that time. And he came into the academy. I had no fear of him either. I want to say that anymore. Fear meaning immediate danger. But yes, fear meaning he crazy.
And you didn't like forget, right. Like
So
right.
I got you. I had no fear. But I saw him in the academy, and I did this. He said, "Hey, Dow," like he ain't never did. Okay, so he said, I did this to him, and I brought him into my office, and I looked at him, and I told him every single thing that he did to me, the impact that had on me, and all of these, the whole gamut. And I would have normally been afraid to be in any kind of closed space, isolated with him, but I did that. And he looked at me, and I said, "I just want to know, why did you do it?" And he looked at me and he said, "I don't know why I did it. I was driven." And that's a word that has never gotten out of my mind and my heart. What does it mean to be driven to do something that you have no issue or no motivation to do whatsoever in terms of being harmed by someone else, the person that you're abusing? And so he said, "But look at you, look at me. I'm diabetic, and I was too at that time. I'm diabetic, and I've been sick, and I've almost went blind, and all these things. And look at you, you're thriving, and you're doing wonderful." I said, "Yes, I am." And then at some point, he said, "I'm sorry," and I believed he really meant that. And I was so excited about that. I wasn't grinning at him, but I was so excited in my heart because I had done the work that I needed to do. And I wanted to offer him that gift. I wanted to offer him the gift of forgiveness. And I looked at him and I said to him, that God does not intend for you to suffer for what you did to me, no more than God intended for me to suffer about things that I've done to other people. And so, yes, I do forgive you, but you need some help. You need to go get some help. That was the last
That's
time that we ever
wow.
really had a conversation. But that's the pathway that led me to forgiveness, and that's how I basically define. I always ask my students to define it for themselves and write it out. Think about it. What does it really mean? Because we've
Yeah.
been given so many kinds of things from the church, from people, from friends, from all these places, that we need to begin to think about what does that mean for us? Because the only
Right.
person that is in charge of me forgiving is me, as I deal
Mm-hmm.
with the Lord and deal with myself.
Yeah. So with that being said, I want to mention that one myth that I do believe, I know forgiveness, people might look at it in different ways, but one thing it does not necessarily equate to is reconciliation.
Exactly.
Meaning that you can forgive a person, but
Right.
just saying, look, we don't have to be in the same space ever again. I don't need to necessarily see you ever again.
Yeah, and Jocelyn,
And
that's one of the reasons um, why pastors should not say that, to forgive them, to reconcile with them, because forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things. I used to describe a long time ago reconciliation as a TV commercial. You have to be as old as I am to remember the commercial, but it was that, the white women running slowly down the meadow, and they were coming toward each other. And then when they got to each other, their hair all bouncing, and they went around and spent around. And we have romanticized reconciliation in those kind of ways that, oh, I'm sorry means we're going to reconcile. No, it doesn't. Reconciliation in the Bible means finding a way to stop the violence. And so when you have both found that way for the violence not to happen, you have already reconciled. You've already done what it is that God wants you to do. You found a way and it ended, but it is not synonymous with getting back together. But many abused women who have been theologically or pastorally counseled wrong believe they're the two, because forgive and go back are the same kinds of conversations that happens mostly at the same time. So you're absolutely right. Reconciliation and forgiveness are two different things. And we have even talked about the kinds of things that need to happen for even the possibility of that to happen,
right.
to go back with someone that has abused you. And
Absolutely. You can't jump. It's not just jumping back into it. There's work that has to be done, right?
exactly.
And that's something we actually talked about on the show a couple of weeks ago. Is if someone forgives you, first, if you're someone who inflicted pain on someone else, don't expect for them to just automatically trust you again, let you back in their space, even if they made the decision to forgive. There's work that needs to be done,
Yeah,
and so
give you
understanding that.
a secular and a sacred kind of example of that. I'm a fan of the mob picture Carlito's Way, and there's so many things that I talk about in that movie. But one of the things that he says in there about being betrayed, there are lines you cross that you just can't come back from. And I have a book. It's an old book, and I have the printed, a copy of it. Not that I copied it. I'm saying that on air, but I do have a copy. And it says, "Till divorce do us part." And it talks about, and there's by a retired Catholic priest, and he says, that marriages do die, and that sometimes we only go to the counseling for the counselor to stamp the marriage dead, or at least give a cause of death. But what we don't do enough in our church is to beginning to provide space, where people can mourn that, because many of them, and I wasn't one of them, really, truly, honestly loved their abuser. And to say we're going to part our ways can be a painful and hurtful thing. And we have not developed enough rituals in the church for agreeable partners to even split from normal marriages that particular way. Let's know from an abusive situation, and ceremonies that help them to say, I did try this, I did want to do this, and I did want to please God in this. But it could not happen. And we need to find ways to talk about that. We have to mourn that. And sometimes we have to help them to mourn. And other times, because our faith community has let us down so much, we have to find a way to leave that space and mourn losing that community. And so there's a lot of grief work involved in forgiveness. There's a lot of grief work that comes with the consequences of the forgiveness. It's akin to an alcoholic. When they say when you get counseling for alcoholic and therapy, and you no longer, and you're married and you've been fighting and fussing and doing all these things that happens in addictive relationships. Once that person has recovered and is well, and has is really not taking alcoholic beverages, they may not want you anymore because there was something that attracted you to them in their addiction, that now that they're not in that space anymore, the relationship is no longer attractive. And so all of these things happen. Healing has consequences. Maybe that's why some people just
Absolutely.
don't want to heal,
They,
because
they
you
just
can
want to stay in the
make
same, yeah.
decisions that you really sometimes don't want to make because you got something out of that and you don't want to let
Yeah.
that go.
Yes, that's really good. That's really good, Dr. Davis. And one last thing before we kind of learn more about what you're doing right now. I think there is a danger in forgiving too soon for multiple reasons, right? Not just in the case of a domestic violence relationship, but I also think that if we say we forgive immediately without going through the process and really looking at the layers of what's underneath and allowing ourselves to feel God-given emotions, to feel anger. Anger is not bad in and of itself. There's a righteous anger for when you're
Right.
treated wrong. And acknowledging what took place, acknowledging the pain that you felt, acknowledging the wrong, acknowledging the grief, going through the actual process, right? Because if you just say, I forgive, and don't even allow yourself the space to feel, but you're doing it more so out of a moral obligation, I believe that will allow for you to still maybe have some unresolved issues and some open wounds that never actually have the chance to heal. So do you have anything else to offer in respect to that, Dr.
I
Davis?
think you said it, because we develop patterns in our lives, and if we don't understand why we made those, why we created them patterns, and then find viable ways, because we're in charge of our healing, to begin that healing process, all we're going to do is repeat those same things over. I used to read a devotion book called Hazelden, and it was for recovering addicts. And in that it said, in that series that I had, and I kept it for a long time. I don't know what I did with it because I loved the book. It said life is a gentle teacher. And if you keep asking yourself, why do you keep making the same mistakes over and over and over? It says, don't get upset with yourself. You just haven't learned your lesson. And when you learn your lesson, you won't make those mistakes anymore because you really learned. And I often tell people that I learned some things and I'm still learning others. And so there are some lessons that I have learned well, and then there are some that I'm still learning. And so life is a gentle teacher. Don't be
It
so upset
is.
with yourself.
It is.
You'll keep making
That's
those mistakes until you learn your lesson. But we
yes,
don't want
yes,
that lesson to cost anybody their life. And that's
that's
what
the
we want them
message.
to get the help that they need.
That is the message. And I'm so grateful for the work that you do and for you sharing your story. And again, we're on the eve of Domestic Violence Month, and we really wanted to make sure we had this broadcast to shed some light on this important issue and to make sure people are aware that there's help out there and that you don't have to struggle alone. That's the strange thing that I have learned about domestic violence and sexual violence. It is so common. It transcends every race, every gender, your sexuality. Well, it transcends all of that, class, and it's happening in the church. It's happening in leadership, but it's silenced. And people often struggle with this alone. And so if you feel that way, there are resources out there. And Dr. Davis, I would love for you to share just briefly, what are some resources out there for someone who might be struggling in a domestic violence relationship?
Well, certainly going to a domestic violence agency and joining one of the support groups. And the reason why I believe that is so helpful is because you get to talk about people who have experienced the same thing, have experienced guilt, have experienced shame, have experienced people not being in their corner, who don't know what to do, who feels shameful about themselves and guilty about themselves and crazy about themselves. I'm a police officer. I got a gun. I got mace. I got a billy club. How the hell am I gonna let somebody beat on me? Who was that person? And so support groups help you to realize you're not alone. You're not crazy. There are people that have healed, and healing means different things to different people. We are never the same anymore, but we are a new person. In trauma, we talk about that as being in the middle, a place where we find happiness in the middle. We're not what we used to be, but we're not what we was, but we found a space where we can live and where we can thrive. And I believe that support groups helps us to do that. The other piece is that therapy. Therapy is a place that I believe in, especially now that the therapists are trauma based. And so being able to go to therapy so that you can, in a professional way, flesh out some of the things that are going on with you. If you're African American, I highly recommend an African American clergy, because some of the dynamics others don't understand. Some other culture may be helpful, but sometimes our stuff is just crazy, because we got to talk about racism. We got to talk about what y'all doing to our black men.
It's a whole lot going on with that. But I'm a big fan of therapy, Dr. Davis. I'll definitely say yes, do that. Get on somebody's couch. So I mean, with the therapy, with support groups, and there's 800 numbers out there. You Google, you can find anything on Google. Just be careful. Make sure that if you're in the relationship right now, your significant other doesn't look in your search history. But you be strategic. You can talk to individuals about how to get the help you need.
Yes.
But we're running out of time, Dr. Jameson. And I hear you have a book coming out soon. So let's talk about that for just a second.
Yes, I do. And I did give you the title of the book, but it's changed since then. And then it changed this morning. And so I'm still working on that. But I can tell you what I'm doing in the book. The book is a memoir. It shares my journey from, I cover a 50-year period from the time I was born, 1952 to 2002. And the reason why I covered those years, because those were probably the most traumatic years. And I also remarried in 2003. And so I didn't want to go into a place of my marriage and where I am now. Everybody that I basically had conversations with and had trauma with, most of them except one, has passed on and have died. They said, don't use pass on, died. And so I felt more comfortable about it, but uncomfortable because I'm telling some secrets that people don't necessarily want you to tell, because they think that it ruins their reputation. It ruins it. But I say to people all the time, and I've learned from scholars, that I keep trying to love everybody else, and I better start loving me. Tell my truth and do what I need to do. And I'm not telling that truth, out of spite or out of vengeance. I've worked through all of that already, thank God. Even though some has been recently, I have worked through it. And so to be able to share that, but I also want to share that, and not every little detail, but enough so that the reader can capture the emotions and the fragility, and capture resilience, and capture the trauma, and capture the ways in which I had to navigate institutions, the way I had to navigate institutions and communities. And I think that's where the name is changing to institutions and communities, where I had institutions and individuals, but communities make up individuals and friends and family and everybody telling you what to do, and the church telling you what to do, and then navigating the police department and the criminal justice system. Because one thing I didn't say to you is I got arrested in this whole domestic violence stuff.
You was going
that's
through.
a longer story anyway.
I say so. I mean, so what you telling me is we're gonna have you back on the show when your book comes out, and I look forward to it, because I know that it's too difficult to unpack.
Yes.
All of what's taking place in those years in this short period of time.
But it's more than a story. It's a
story.
navigation that people need to understand and hear about and know and learn.
Yes, yes. And I thank you for just sharing this part of your story because I already know I see the chat blowing up and I thank you all for tuning in. People are being blessed by your transparency, how authentic you are, how real you are about this, because
Thank you.
again, we're bringing light to a subject that is hidden in the darkness.
Amen.
And we want people to know that you don't have to stay in that place. And so thank you, Dr. Davis. Thank you
You're
so
so
much
welcome.
for your ministry and
Thank
what you're
you for
doing.
inviting me. I
I
love you. I love what you're doing. And I just
thank
wish
you.
blessings upon you. And if anybody can support you in any kind of way, tell them and tell them 15 times because I believe you're worth being supported. And congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much. And again, we will definitely have you back. So I'm looking forward to that. And I again thank you all for tuning in and for being a part of our experience over the last several months. Again, this has been an incredible series, and I want you to subscribe and share the stories that we've shared over the last several weeks with others. This is not just for you, this is help to build the kingdom, to help other people heal. So if you know of someone who needs to see this or to hear this, share it with them so they can be encouraged as well.
Mhm.
Also, while we are on break, quote unquote, for the live broadcast, we're going to be working behind the scenes for you. And I'm going to ask an important favor. We are going to be asking for your feedback to help us to understand what challenges you are facing right now on your journey. And so we put together a very simple survey. It is 4 questions long. It'll probably take you all of 3 minutes to answer, but it's really going to help us to understand what you need. And so anyone who's on our email list, I'm going to send out that survey next week. And also we're putting it in the chat for you right now on our Facebook page and YouTube channel so that you can just let us know what challenges are you facing right now as it relates to healing so that we can make sure to address that because we do this for you. We care about you. We want to see God move in your life and want you to experience experience the promises of God. So please take just a few minutes to fill out that survey so we can prepare for the next season. And we will be back next year better than ever. And so I thank God for each and every one of you. Again, continue to stay connected by being a part of our Facebook group, YouTube channel, and subscribe to our email list by going to faithonthejourney.org. It'll take you 2 seconds to do it. And we'll be able to continue to stay in touch as we prepare for the new year. But again, thank you, Dr. Davis. Bless you. Pray blessings over your ministry. Pray for your health, your family. And I can't wait for your book to come out. I will be wanting an autographed copy and just putting in that little request right now. And again, everyone, God bless you for tuning in. And we will see you next year on our broadcast when we return. But until then, you stay blessed and keep your faith on the journey.